Hi, I'm Phil Curry. The thoughts in this presentation are the result of my 45-year career, which has evolved through three distinct phases. The first phase was in sales, branch management and executive leadership roles in local, national and international agribusiness organisations. I was initiated to international business in this first phase with responsibilities for an export office in one position, followed by responsibility for international marketing as part of my role as marketing manager in another. Then I spent 25 years as a management consultant, specialising in marketing and business management. During that phase, I completed approximately 400 separate consultancy assignments, and quite a few of them involved the development of new international markets for clients. The current phase, as an academic and researcher, includes being responsible for teaching agribusiness marketing, exporting and management to undergraduates, postgraduates and supervising PhD candidates. My international business experience currently stands at around 75 overseas trips and 2,000 meetings in 25 countries for the purposes of collecting market intelligence and or negotiating business for and on behalf of Australian clients, and 25 international trips for academic purposes with students and involved in Australian aid projects in Asia. This presentation focuses specifically on a process to prioritise international markets for new and existing exporters. The information on this slide is just common sense. The problem is that it's not all that common. It is very easy to be attracted to large markets or to respond to inquiries and mistakenly believe that they have come from the most attractive markets. However, large markets are normally very competitive and can be quite complex, which makes them expensive to enter, capture and retain market share, and to achieve profitable sales. Identifying an attractive but smaller market makes a lot of sense for first-time exporters. This presentation focuses on a process for identifying the relative attractiveness of markets from the 200 or so countries in the world. I've seen people attempt to set priorities by finding and analysing data about far too many countries and find themselves drowning in information. My own experience suggests that attractive markets are going to be those that are already importing the commodity or product of interest to you. After all, it is a very expensive process to educate consumers or customers in an international market about a product of which they have limited knowledge, so it makes sense to look for markets in which customers and or consumers have already learned about and are using, and especially if demand is growing. You can usually find trade data and other sources of information on the internet that will allow you to identify the countries that are already importing the commodity or product of interest, both from Australia and from elsewhere. It is usually a relatively small number of countries that are responsible for the vast majority of the imported products, and I've always tended to shortlist those and focus them for more research attention. Of course, first-time exporters should avoid markets that are complex, or in which political instability exists, or in which interference with imports is likely to occur. I've personally never been concerned about language as a barrier and believe that a very attractive market niche in a market that requires other than English language is a much better bet than a less attractive market that has been selected simply because English is spoken by most of the population. So I tend to find the 5 to 8 markets that are importing the commodity or product category of interest from any country and from Australia, exclude any that are risky and use them as my initial short list. It is really important to develop a list of characteristics that would make a market attractive to your own product. I think every list should include market growth rate, and I personally feel that this is the single most important factor because it is so much easier to enter a market where there is growing demand for a product or commodity than one where demand is mature or in decline. The other characteristics that I have found most useful is to understand the distribution channels and customers or consumer uses of the product, so you can start to understand the degree to which your product might fit into the market and whether it may be able to be differentiated. Of course, market size is always of interest, but let's face it, most markets that are satisfying demand with imports are likely to be sufficiently large for an Australian exporter. If you are dealing with a seasonal fruit or vegetable, then identifying markets where counter-seasonal demand exists can be useful. There are many other characteristics that you might want to add to your list, but before you add too many, just consider whether they will really help you to prioritise relative attractiveness of the different markets. You can easily find lists of characteristics that can be used to prioritise international markets on the internet, and these lists often include things like tariff and non-tariff barriers to entry, degree of country development, political stability, import regulations, cultural affinity, language, availability and cost of air and sea freight, the legal system, and whether it will be useful to you to defend your intellectual property or not. However, before you invest time and effort to find this data, please consider the extent to which it is truly useful. The first source of useful data is, of course, the internet. However, please do not overlook making telephone calls to actors in value chains for your commodity or product category. You'll be surprised how much information you can obtain if you're persistent and polite. This is a framework that can be used to prepare a matrix of information to inform the prioritization process. Other characteristics that are important to a particular commodity or product category of interest can and should be added. Whilst this type of matrix is mostly completed from secondary data, please don't be afraid to make telephone calls and send emails to potential information sources in each of the shortlisted countries. You may be surprised how beneficial making contact with distribution channel members such as importers, distributors, retailers, wholesalers, processors, restaurants, etc. can be. This diagram illustrates the evidence-based prioritization process. You're effectively using a process of elimination in combination with data collection and analysis to prioritize the most attractive markets. Please watch my video Market Visit for Research for my suggestions about the visit to the top 3. I had a client once who came back from a holiday in the UK, and he told me that he had stayed at a bed and breakfast in England and got into a discussion with the owner of the B&B. During that discussion, he revealed the nature of his business, and by the end of his stay had agreed that the B&B owner would be his company's import distributor for the whole of the UK. This clearly is not the way to establish an international market. Of course, like many things in life, you learn by doing, but anyone who is starting to export can avoid common mistakes, including relying on hearsay and not seeking to confirm information through research. On the other hand, we should also learn from Michael Porter, who stated that it is important to get into the market early, and no one wants to suffer paralysis through analysis by spending too much time on secondary data collection. Adequate research and analysis is always useful for informing decisions. A common mistake I have seen people make is to rely on macroeconomic data, which applies an average across the whole population, when it is nearly always relatively small segments of the market that are of interest to an Australian exporter. Finally, anyone considering export as a business strategy should attend as many courses as they can, learn from other exporters and other information sources such as banks, intellectual property lawyers and freight forwarders, who are always experts in facilitating the shipment of goods from Australia to anywhere in the world. Thank you for taking the time to watch this presentation. If you would like to engage with me to help you prioritise markets or to help your agribusiness to grow in any way, I welcome your inquiry.